So when I took my job at City University about 2.5 years ago, the position was called Professor of Entrepreneurial Journalism, and now it's called Professor of Journalism Innovation. We can talk about why that changed, but it kind of made me wonder what entrepreneurial journalism was actually all about, because I took the job and thought, well, okay, so I need to know a little bit about this now. So I started looking into what was this idea of entrepreneurialism in journalism, and what I've been thinking about is about all the different challenges that this raises, opportunities, of course, but challenges that this raises. So that's what I talk about a little bit with you today. So let me do a little kind of very broad definition of terms at the start. So entrepreneurial journalism stretched to mean all kinds of different things, but this is what I'm going to take it to mean, because it can mean innovation within an enterprise, which actually is, of course, much more common and typically more successful, though has its challenges as well. But I'm going to talk about it in terms of being something that someone who has a journalistic interest, content-related, information-related idea for doing something new, starts or joins a startup organization. So of course that's become a attractive, not just viable really, but attractive option for journalists. We all know the industry has been struggling more in America than, I'm from America, as you can tell, more in America than here, somewhat because of the structure of the press. You have a strong national press here. We don't really have a very strong national press, with a couple of exceptions. But certainly if you look at the regional press in the UK, you see a lot of these problems. So there's a lot of angst and a lot of revenue loss and a lot of staff loss. And so journalism has become a more tenuous occupation, I think you would say, than it used to be. And so journalists have left the newsroom for a variety of reasons, or they haven't gotten in the door in the first place. And so some of them have been attracted to this idea of being a media entrepreneur. And I want to talk about the ways that I think that that's destructive, or disruptive, destructive in some ways, but disruptive really, both for the industry and for organizations. I thought I changed all those Z's to S's, sorry. Both for organizations and for individual journalists. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact here today with you. So I think it's probably easier if I just took that. I changed that one and didn't catch them all. So a little bit of context first, which of course you all know. Media organizations have entrepreneurial roots. That's where we came from in the 19th century and the early 20th century, when things were being built and that people were doing new things and finding new ways to make money, all those different kinds of things. So very much an entrepreneurial birth to journalism as we know it, birth to news organizations, housing journalism as we know it. But then, of course, in the 20th century, the storyline changed, and we became much more about, particularly in print segment, it's a little bit different here in the broadcast segment. In America, the broadcast segment is, you could make a similar case for the story there. Here, there's much more public, in Europe in general, much more public interest broadcasting, but particularly in print. The storyline became different. Media organizations became large enterprises and kind of small c conservative for a variety of reasons, again, particularly in the States, but also here. The ownership structures meant that it was much more in line with what they were after, to focus less on risk-taking, actually, and more on profit-making than risk-taking, because they became publicly held companies. Stockholders want that for other reasons as well. And of course, they became phenomenally profitable in many cases for a lot of different reasons. Newspaper profit was as high, not very long ago, as 30%. Television in the U.S., there were television stations in the U.S. that were making, so we have a different structure. We have a network and affiliate structure. As high as 40% in some markets. I mean, it was just ridiculously high profit margins really through the 20th century. That's no longer the case. And I would say they were profitable for lots of different reasons, lots of different kind of economic, structural reasons. But I think one of the main reasons they were profitable is clearly that they had almost a monopoly on something for which there is always high demand, which is information. Information that is reasonably reliable, reasonably trustworthy, reasonably timely, all those kind of good things. We always want that. And through the 20th century, if you wanted to get that information out, if you were an information provider, you kind of had two choices. You could go stand on the street corner and see if you could attract a crowd, or you could go through the media. One way or another, you could You could try to attract media attention. You could go into public relations. You could buy a printing press if you had the wherewithal to do that. Of course, that's not the world we live in anymore. So the internet completely changed that business model in lots of different ways. But I think fundamentally it was about, if I now need information or if I want to create information, either of those things, I no longer have to go through the media. Which is a problem if you, of course, are one of the people who's, making your money through this business model and through this near monopoly. Not an entire monopoly. You could get out information in other ways, but really you kind of had a lock on that. So that was a problem. And then compounding that problem is that because they had become these very large organizations, they were slow to respond. They didn't really know how to quite deal with that. They thought that the best way to deal with it was to basically continue the model that they had already had, which was get a lot of people to come to your product. The more people who come to your product, the more other people who want to pay money for that will want to reach them. The people will pay money, and also the advertisers will want to reach them one way or another. I know it's a little bit different for public service broadcasters, but that's the basic business model. And they kept trying to extend that into the internet. That's why we have the model of let's give away our content for free. It sounds stupid now in 2016 perhaps, but if your model was always based on the more people, the better, because the more people we have, the more advertisers we'll have trying to reach them, that made a lot of sense. Doesn't make a lot of sense anymore, but it took them a while to figure that out, a long while, like about 15 years or so, to actually realize that. And on top of that, this sort of small c conservative structure that they had was very counterproductive to an environment where it was really beneficial to be entrepreneurial, to build fast, to fail fast, to learn from that, to try it again, to keep on iterating. If you're a large public company owned by stockholders, they're really not into failure, which loses the money, right? They're into continually expanding their profit margins, not going through cycles where you shrink them and you eventually it gets to be a really good thing, but it takes you a while to get there. So difficult context in which they live. So I want to say that organizations are vulnerable in at least three ways in relation to the audiences that we have in a digital world. Because there's three different kinds of audiences that I think all of which pose problems to the structure of legacy media organizations, traditional media organizations, and so I'm going to unpack that just a little bit. One is that most of these organizations, although certainly we have niche magazines, we have certain media that do go for a smaller audience. But if we're thinking about newspapers, news magazines, news programs on television or radio, they're really going for a mass general interest audience. Lots of people, undifferentiated understanding of who their audience is. And what they're providing to that audience is a bundle, right? So I'm buying The Guardian, I'm buying The Times, I'm buying the Daily Mail, whatever it might be, and there's a lot of stuff in there, some of which I care about, some of which I don't, but I'm buying the bundle, I'm seeing what's on the front page, that's probably attracting me in. If I'm a subscriber, I'm just buying the bundle on a regular basis, but if I go to the newsstand, I'm lured in by what's there, and then I see the rest. Or I get grabbed by what's at the top of the news program, and then I stay, we hope, and I watch at least some of the rest. Maybe I watch the whole thing. So there's a mass general interest audience about whom I know very little. Up until recently, now I know an enormous amount because of metrics and other data that we can talk about. Media organizations are getting data in lots of different ways now. But really, until recently, I didn't really know a lot. I knew in a very broad way, based on quarterly, I think it's the same here, quarterly circulation audits. If I'm a newspaper, who those people were, really broadly conceived. I mean, I have some idea. I mean, I know that if I'm putting out The Sun, that's probably not the same audience as if I'm putting out The Guardian, but I don't really know a lot about them, right? I don't know what they care about. I can do focus groups, I can do some kind of periodic high-level things, but I don't know a lot about them. And so I have to kind of construe them or construct my product for a really broad, vague kind of sense of what these people might want. Obviously, that's not the world we live in anymore. But journalists news organizations have, until very recently, not been really attuned to getting detailed information about audiences. But in an entrepreneurial world, you have to know a lot about your audience, very, very specifically, not just not just how they use your product, but what else they do, who they are, what kinds of things they do when they're not using the media, how they use media, lots and lots of information, or it's not really going to work for you. So I'm producing a bundled service with all kinds of, all right, let me finish the point about the bundle. So I'm used to putting out a bundle of information for this mass general audience, but the web doesn't really work on bundling, right? How many of you go to more than maybe 1 or 2 home pages a day? Do you? Okay, well, I know. I go to the BBC as my homepage. It comes up, and then after that, not so much. Many people are going to follow social media pointers. They're going to follow aggregator sites. They're going to keyword interest and find a story. I want to know if the 2 people are actually going on strike on Friday, like they keep saying they are. So I'm probably going to go look for that. I'm not necessarily going to go. Sometimes I do. I'm not necessarily going to go to the Evening Standard homepage because there's going to be something else on there. I'm going to go find out about the tube strike. So the bundle doesn't work the same way. Even if I do go to the homepage and start my experience from there, I probably don't go through it in the same way that I've gone through the newspaper. So that's causing a problem for them. So that's the traditional audience that they've always had, has been this sort of mass audience that I don't know a lot about. I have a general sense of who they are, and I'm giving them an information bundle that's designed to appeal to a lot of different people in different ways with a cluster of diverse content and information. It doesn't work all that well on the web or in digital formats in general. The second kind of audience that I think is somewhat of a problem for many media organizations, although certainly magazines have always targeted niches in some ways, but for larger organizations, the current audience online is in many cases looking for specific kinds of information, right? So they're looking for information of direct interest to them. That's increasingly true, I think. The web facilitates that, and so they're looking for information that's very, very specific to their interests. That might be geographical, it might be topical, it might be a lot of different things. It might be related, connecting to other people, which in general mass media outlets are not all that good at helping you make those connections. So that's been a challenge as well. So niche audiences are, if I'm a big legacy media outlet, I have to really think about how I'm going to address that need for personal information online or personally relevant information online. I also have to think about what I'm going to do with these people, in the sense that if I'm interested in a very specific topic, I probably know a lot about it already. I'm probably already somewhat knowledgeable about that niche topic. And for media organizations, it's also been a challenge of how am I going to take advantage of that? How am I going to get input from my audience about this thing that they're interested in, the specific thing that they're interested in, while somehow kind of filtering out all the other stuff that comes along with that? That's been pretty hard. Entrepreneurial organizations are quite good at, well, the ones that succeed, are quite good at incorporating information from their users, from their audiences. It's much more of a relationship and an exchange. That's also been a little bit difficult for mainstream outlets to do. So the mass is kind of the audience of the past. There is still a mass audience, but they're very fractured and fragmented and looking for personally relevant information, much less than bundled information. A niche audience is, I think, very much the audience of the present. I'm looking for specifically relevant things to me. And certainly the audience, this is really the present now, but you can think about this as the audience of the near future, is a mobile audience. We're all getting our information from our phone. Somehow I have lost my connection today, and as soon as I get home, I'm going to have to call EE and ask them what's going on, because I'm lost without it. I can't. I'm disconnected from the world. I'm old, and it's driving me crazy. It certainly drives younger people just right up the wall when they don't have that connection to each other and to the world right there in their pocket. So this is another disruption for media organizations, that they now need to be mobile. Mobile is just a huge a hugely disruptive force for them, trying to figure out how advertising works, trying to figure out what audiences do, trying to deliver a product that's a different product. When it's on a different kind of screen, it's a different way that people engage with it. It's different in all kinds of different ways. So here too, they've been less nimble than the startups in making that transition. I should also say, I should just mention, at least in passing, that if you've got a model that's built on reaching a lot of people with broad content that's basically advertising supported, within the past 6 months, year to 6 months in particular, has been a huge challenge. So that's a huge challenge to an advertising supported digital revenue model now. Ad blockers. Ad blockers. How many of you have ad blockers? Have installed ad blockers? All of the younger people and some of the older ones have installed ad blockers. So if my model is based on that first thing, which by and large for most mainstream organizations it still is in some ways, huge problem. Ad blockers are, so what have they been doing in response to ad blockers? A variety of things. They've been tearing their hair out. Some of them are going to what's called native advertising. I don't want to get sidetracked on native. You know what native advertising is? Yeah, it's kind of embedded in various different kinds of ways, different flavors of it, but it's kind of part of your content in a way that advertising has never been. Harder to block, but also potentially at least harder to discern, harder to tell when you're looking at an ad. So there's all kinds of issues. Some very good organizations are going with native advertising. New York Times is doing a lot of it. Guardian is doing a lot of it. BuzzFeed does it all the time. BuzzFeed does some interesting things, different permutations. Anyway, they're really struggling with this. So let me go on. But they've got these different kinds of audiences. Today there are different kinds of audiences, increasingly mobile in the future. A disruption to how this is actually going to enable them to sustain their model. They're really struggling. They've been struggling to go digital first for the past 15 years, and now they're kind of thinking, really we need to be mobile first, and they're not really quite sure how to do that. I think a great many media organizations' mobile platforms are less than optimal at the moment, at least, I would say. Okay, and of course the mobile audience, very, very personal, even more so than the niche audiences, very much personalized information. They're getting, it's a very personal device. We feel attached to it, and we want our content to kind of reflect that. So let me kind of finish sort of with one more slide, with organizations by making 2 points. One is that they're disruptive that startups, if you're a new organization, you're coming along and you're better able to respond to these changes. You're better able to respond to people wanting an unbundled product, to being able to find it, to be able to connect with each other, to be able to satisfy particular information needs, to be able to do that on a mobile platform and in different ways that take advantage of some different affordances. Startups are finding that easier to do. They're smaller, they're nimble, they're less hierarchical, they're probably not answerable in many cases to stockholders. They have a little bit of freedom to do what they're interested in doing. And so they're disruptive in a variety of ways. I think they're, but I should say, however, that it's not easy to be a startup. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, this is like the golden answer to everything, that, well, I'll just go out and start my own. Very hard to do, actually, because it actually is hard to compete with someone who has a brand name and a fairly large staff, and despite their troubles, more resources than you probably have. So I don't want to make it sound like doing a startup is easy. I do want to make the point, though, that however difficult it may be, there are lots and lots of startups, and each one of them disrupts the bigger guys, the bigger organizations in some ways. And I think in some pretty substantial ways. So they're disruptive in terms of this ability to meet it, particularly to fill a niche. So to meet a need, to draw people away. The people who are really, really interested in healthcare have lots of other places they can go to find that now. They don't have to go to the Times, right? They don't have to go to a traditional organization to find out about that. So they're disruptive in terms of the needs that they fill. The audience, even if they have small audiences, and almost all of them do, There's a limited amount of media time we all have in our day, a limited amount of time we have in our day, period. And where is that coming from? We're not adding hours, we're not adding minutes. It's being taken away. So we're drawing attention away. We're drawing money, they draw money away in a variety of ways: audiences, advertisers, attention, investment. And I think one that we don't look at or think about as much, but a lot of really smart people are going there. The Guardian, I love the Guardian. Guardian's on my next slide. They have lost a bunch of really good people to BuzzFeed just in the past year. I don't know what's going on there. I mean, since Russ Bridger left, there's been kind of an exodus from the Guardian, and a lot of them, of the ones that I know, have been really, really sharp people. So, and where are they going? Some of them are going to other established outlets, but quite a few of them are going to startups. Notably BuzzFeed. One of their editors went to BuzzFeed and apparently lured some people away. It's a long story, and I don't know the ins and outs of the story. But nonetheless, they are getting a lot of the really smart people. I see our students, and I'm sure your students as well, you who are students, you have lots of options. It's not an easy market to enter. It never has been, but lots more options for you now. And a lot of people are going to work for some of the startups, and they're not helping out the big organizations who need those ideas and creativity to change. So I think there's a lot of lots of disruptions for them at all kinds of levels. And the other thing, the other overall point I would say is that startups, and I haven't really mentioned this, but I will now, that media organizations, although they are changing, historically and really still to an enormous extent, all their eggs are in two baskets. They're in audiences and they're in advertising. And of course, those baskets are intertwined, interwoven baskets. They go together, but that's where almost all of the revenue comes from. And if there's one thing that startups are making the point about in terms of revenue generation, is that you have to diversify. And I actually think that media organizations are learning that lesson, and that's actually a positive impact, I think, of startups for media organizations, that you make money from events, you make money from services that you might provide, you make money from donations, you make money from any way that you can, but it's not just all about advertisers and audiences. And you really, really need to be creative in what you're doing. And I actually would. I do love the Guardian. I worry for them. They're losing money again. For a while, they were living off Auto Trader, and now I think they burned through a lot of that money. They sold it. They owned Auto Trader, and they sold it and had a big pot.
You lost the top of 5 years.
Yeah. They're losing some money. But anyway, and they're perennially losing money. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But anyway, I do want to make a positive point about the Guardian. I have my little prop in my pocket. Guardian member. Anyone else here a Guardian member? Yay! Should all become Guardian members. The Guardian member. The reason I think this is interesting. Well, it's interesting for a variety of reasons. One is that they started this scheme, I bet a year and a half ago now, and it was September of 14, so second half of 2014. And the idea is that you pay a certain amount of money up front, depending on what level of membership that you've signed up for. And for that, you get no discount whatsoever in any fashion off the newspaper. You don't get access. I mean, they're free online. You don't get special access. You still have to pay. I think we're up to $270 now for the Saturday newspaper. None of those kinds of benefits do you get. And they didn't market it based on that. You do get a discount. They hold a lot of events for their members, but also for the public. You get early booking and a discount on the events. Okay, that's nice. But the interesting thing about the Guardian and this membership scheme to me, and I'd be interested to see other organizations are starting to pick up on it. I've seen a couple of others doing similar kinds of things, is that they really marketed it as join the club, become part of this community, not get the newspaper because we have the best news coverage, or our opinions are the most informed, or we're the liberal voice of society, and none of those things were actually what they marketed themselves on. What they marketed themselves on were join this club, join this community of people who care about information, care about society. It was a very interesting marketing strategy. They have about 100,000 members. I think maybe a little bit more than that now. The last I saw, they don't publicize that real readily, but that's the last number that I saw. Now, they have different membership schemes. I think the vast majority of those people are not the people who are paying, hundreds of pounds a year to be a Guardian member. I think most of them are the ones paying £5. It's some ridiculously small amount you can be a member. But I do think still it's an interesting strategy for a big news organization to say, associate yourself with us. You're probably going to associate yourself with us because you like our product, but they really didn't market it about the product. I thought that was quite interesting, and I think that's a recognition, whether it works or not, or however much they're making from that. It's a recognition that the media have to be something more than just a source of information, because they no longer have that monopoly that made them money for so long, being a source of information. And you could always, of course, they always had competitors. You could always get information from different competitors, but within the same sector. In a fairly small number, because it was an expensive proposition to run a newspaper or to put out a TV show. So I think this is kind of interesting. And I guess I use it as example A because I'm a member and I like them, but also because I think it's an example of news organizations responding to challenges in creative ways. Whether it works or whether it doesn't, we have to see, but it's still creative and it's still different, and it's a different way of thinking about what I do as a media organization, and in fact thinking about, I have a relationship with the people who come to me for whatever reason. It's not just that I'm sitting up here and I'm sending out information and people do what they will with it. It's that I have this kind of ongoing connection to them, which I think is interesting. I think they're still losing money, but I think it's interesting that they're doing it. Everyone's got problems. I mean, different people responded, different organizations responded in different ways. Of course, the Times, Telegraph, the financial ones are behind paywalls. I'm not sure about that. I think that's still advertising and audiences in different combinations, but some of them are thinking creatively. Okay, let me do another 10 minutes or so, because this one will be a little bit more familiar to you, but I do want to talk a little bit about the journalists. So that was the news organizations, my take on them. And there's other issues we could talk about as well, but that's probably good enough. So let me talk a little bit about the journalists, the people in the newsroom. Again, very familiar context. I think the disruption from startups, from entrepreneurial journalism, entrepreneurial approaches to news, I think from two core challenges for journalists, for the people who, so now kind of thinking about the people who go into an entrepreneurial enterprise or are considering it. One is a normative issue. So journalists, we care pretty passionately about independence. This is, again, in America, journalists will cite the First Amendment at the drop of any hat whatsoever. So we really care about autonomy a lot. We think about it a lot. We talk about it a lot, probably to a fault. But I mean, it certainly has served a purpose. We tend to think about autonomy in terms of autonomy from government. That's the First Amendment. Here, it's very similar here. Without the First Amendment, but still with that sense that we are not dictated to by people in authority, particularly by government, and also from commercial sources, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. And then the other kind of challenge or disruption or issue for journalists as they become entrepreneurs, I think, is a practical issue, which is that they don't know. We tend not to know about a lot of the things we need to know about. We tend to know about all the things we teach our students, the things that you learn here. We need to know about, having good news judgment and telling a story well, and things about holding the powerful to account at a higher level. We know about law. We know about some of those things. We don't know a lot about business. We very much keep business issues separate from what we know, what we understand about journalism, what we know how to do. And we do that quite deliberately because of the normative issues, right? Because that's not what journalists do. Journalists do not in a good sense, we're not beholden to the money. We're not beholden to where the money comes from. On the other hand, that kind of means we don't know anything about it either. And so if I go out there and now I'm trying to start up or sustain or contribute to even an enterprise that doesn't have all of those traditional structures in place and revenue models in place, it can be a challenge for me. So my one fuzzy photo. So there you are. So how do I become, as a journalist, how do I become an entrepreneur? Let me talk about this in a couple of different, like 3 different slides, and then I have some about journalism education, but we'll make those optional. I can leave you the PowerPoint if you want it. So journalists in a traditional newsroom, traditional news organization, certainly before the age of metrics, but even now to some extent, we don't really know much about that mass audience out there. The relationship, what's the idea of having a relationship, kind of a weird thing for many journalists, but to the sense that there was a sense of who these people were, it was very one-dimensional. We do our thing, we interact with our sources, we interact with our colleagues, we interact with our editor, producer, people in the newsroom, and our sources. We don't really interact with audiences. When I was in the newsroom, I never even thought about such a thing as interacting with my audience. It was kind of cool if I was out on the street and someone was reading my story. That's about as far as it went. I really didn't have any kind of connection with them. If I'm an entrepreneur, however, that's really not going to work. I think I mentioned this before, I really need to know a lot about these people in a great amount of detail. Moreover, I have to really be pretty aggressive in making them think they want me. So I have to think about branding myself, I have to think about marketing myself. Those are uncomfortable concepts for many journalists. And if you work for the Times, you don't really have to do that because the Times does it for you. The Times is the brand, and they do fantastic journalism. I just had the editor of the Insight team just came and talked to my class the other day. It was just inspirational. It was great. They do great stuff. But how many people out there besides those of us, you may not know who he is, but besides people within the industry even know who he is. They don't know who he is. They know who the Times is. And if they like it, then they like it, and that's great. But as an entrepreneur, I don't have that. I don't have that brand. I don't have that sense of, history or I haven't built up that trust and that concept of being a part of people's lives over time. So I have to go out there and I have to get them. I have to get contributions from them because I probably don't have the wherewithal to do it all myself. Again, if I work for the Times, that doesn't really matter because it's not the Times will take care of it. The Times will hire the people it needs. Or maybe they won't, and maybe I have to do a little bit of extra work, but, I may not like that. I'm sure I go to the pub and bitch about it, but still, it's really not my job to do all these different kinds of things. I don't have to go out there myself and make sure that we have something to put in the newspaper tomorrow. That's kind of not my job. Or put on the air, put out on the news show. And I have to have a sustainable market as well, and it is a highly competitive world. That's really, really difficult. So I not only have to know about them, and I have to go out and get them, and I have to get them to be contributing because I probably don't have a large enough staff to be able to do that myself, and I've got to have content all the time because otherwise people are not going to come to me. So they have to be not just consumers of my information, but contributors to it, producers with an S, and then I have to make that sustainable. So these are challenges. I started off with challenges that entrepreneurs create, but there's challenges to people trying to be the entrepreneurs as well. So quickly, let me pop through these so we leave some time. There's certainly challenges related to money. These are audiences, advertisers, investors, whatever form that might take, sources. Those are overlapping categories. Those people, it's the same person. The same person is probably the same person that you want to be using your probably niche product about. I don't know, pop-ups in London, whatever it might be. I'm sure there's some niche site that's all about pop-ups. Well, who's going to want to who's going to want to read that is probably people who are starting pop-ups. Right? I mean, some people who are going to them and are interested in following up with what's going on, but it's probably the people who are thinking about having one or doing one, or they did one in one neighborhood and they want to do it in another. Well, they're probably your advertisers as well. They may be your investors. They almost certainly are your sources. So all those categories overlap in a way that they probably didn't for traditional, well, they may have overlapped for a traditional news organization, but you as the journalists really only interacted with them at on the last one, right, as sources. Now, those people might or might not also be your audiences. They probably are, but that's not really how you think about them. And so here we're getting into kind of those normative issues about separating, wearing those separate hats, and how do you negotiate that space? The middle point there is a kind of a common problem that people who have done some research into entrepreneurial journalists have repeatedly identified, Robert Picard in particular, and people that he's worked with. What do we know as journalists? We think about going out and being entrepreneurs. What do we know? What do we bring to that? We know journalism. We care about it. We know how to do it. We're into the content. We have this great idea for how to do content better and what we might do and how we might cover a particular topic, whatever it might be. And so when journalists do startups, they tend to put a lot of resources into the content because to them, that's, to us, to all of us, that's what really matters. And it does. However, that means because we don't know a lot about the business aspects, we don't know a lot about marketing kinds of things. There's other aspects of running a business that we don't know about. We tend to have what Bob Picard calls formational myopia, right? We think about the content, we neglect the other parts, and you have to have the other parts as well. So having a huge staff to create really great content is great, but it's a cost. It's not a revenue stream, it's a cost. So that's been a problem for many entrepreneurial journalists. And then we just basically don't have the skills. We just, you can go out and hire the skills. We can go out and get a business manager. You can get the accountant. You can get the marketing team. You can get all those things, but they cost money, right? They're not going to do it for free, and they're not things we know about because that has very explicitly, and this ties into the normative and the economic and practical issues. I think are really interrelated here. If I'm a journalist, it is not my job. Not only is it not my job because I don't know anything about it, it is quite explicitly not my job to be about the money. I get in a lot of trouble if, in fact, it becomes about the money. Look at the Telegraph and HSBC, right, in the last year. It becomes about the money. And it interferes. It's a problem for the journalism. That makes a lot of sense in a traditional space. So I don't know about these things, and I quite explicitly think I should not know about them. And that's probably true in many ways. And yet, if I'm starting up a business, I have to know about, someone has to know about those things, or the business isn't going to succeed. So that becomes an issue. It becomes very disruptive. And then this is kind of all the same point in a way. But I think that each of these, you can think about audiences as being an issue because we don't know a lot about them. You can think about money as being an issue because I quite explicitly keep my hands away from the money as a journalist. And I do that because of the journalistic values. I do that because the perception certainly is that my integrity, the last one really, is crucial, which it is. It always is. If you don't have that, no matter what kind of journalism you're doing, whether it's a startup or whether you're working for the BBC, then you kind of don't have anything. So that's an issue. Also, the value, the what is valuable kinds of issues. It's a different use of the word value. It is challenged for a startup because despite all of the problems I've been highlighting, when something big happens, I'm still going to turn to the BBC. I'm still going to turn to whichever newspaper it is that I happen to trust or like the best. I'm still going to go to someone that I trust. So if I'm trying to generate that value, if I am in fact trying to do investigative journalism and hold the powerful to account, I have a lot more clout if I'm doing that as the Telegraph or the Times or the Guardian, the BBC or ITV, whoever it might be, than I do if I'm just Jane with a startup. I'm pretty easy to ignore. I don't really have that kind of value. Is hard for a startup to generate. Now you can get to a point where you've got enough buzz around you, or you've got the right people in your audience mix that maybe you become important, but it takes a while. So you do have to think about what your value is, and you have to think about the audience as people you have a relationship with, and not just delivering a product to. We tend to sort of like writing stories and talking to our sources and being on the front page in an old time kind of world. We're not necessarily the best people for building up relationships, and it's difficult too. I mean, look at the controversy now and all the decisions that are being made around comments. The news organizations, I mean, that's a very kind of old school at this point way of thinking about audience relationships and interactions, but news organizations have been trying to make comments work for 10 years now, and it's hard. And a lot of them are now saying, oh, the hell with it. Let's just turn them off because there's so much trouble. The Guardian, comment is free. That's like their mantra, their motto, and has been for 100 years. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, said they were going to just discontinue comments on any story related to, I think I have these three right, I think it was race, immigration, and Islam. They just said, we can't. I mean, the trolls are just out of control. So audience relationships are difficult. But you have to have them, particularly if you're an entrepreneur. You can't, there's all of these other options, and if I don't feel some sense of connection to what you're offering, you're dead. So I can make this my last slide, I think. Yes, I can make this my last slide. I have a few more on educational kinds of issues, but don't have to go into those. So I do think that this environment in which legacy outlets are challenged and disrupted in a great many ways. People who work for them are challenged and disrupted, both when they're within the organization. I didn't really talk about that, but of course these organizations are themselves changing, consolidating, doing all kinds of things that are different. But certainly when they go out to and start something new, really moving outside of your camera range this whole time. When they go out and start something new, that really becomes, it really raises, I think, these kind of existential questions for journalists who try to start something else. What is it that I do? What is valuable about what I do? I probably think that's the content that I provide. It may be my contacts, it may be my tenacity as a reporter, maybe a lot of things related to content, but it's probably about content. How can I make that valuable in this space where there is so much of it, and I'm just kind of a new face on the block? So what is the value, and how much of it is there? Who is that valuable to? So I have to think about my audiences in different ways. What's my role? What's success? What makes success? I think big news organizations are having to think about that now as well. But certainly, if I'm doing a startup, what is my goal? What's good? So I've got to wear all these different hats. I've got to be the marketing person, or I've got to at least know about it. If I hire someone to be my marketing person, of course it's going to cost me some money. I still have to know about it. They're still going to report to me because I'm the boss. It's great. So how can I do that? What do I have to know? How do I learn it? How do I get it? Some of those hats do conflict. I do have to somehow, even if I'm worrying about the money, I do have to keep that from influencing what I do as a journalist, because that's my credibility. It's my credibility no matter what kind of journalism I'm doing. What are the relationships that are important? How can I nurture them? How can I protect them? So, and there's probably more. But I will stop, because I do want to leave time if you have questions. Thank you. What can we talk about?
I'll stand back here because I need to keep the truck in the camera. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
It's a really simple thing. That was great. Thank you very much. Have you identified any startup that you think is coming anywhere near to answering those questions?
To answering those questions? Well, that's a good question. I think I'd have to do the research to ask them the questions to find out if they were. There are successful startups. There are startups that are doing things well, and I think doing them pretty ethically. I mean, I would look at someone like Quartz maybe, or someone like Politico, or some. I mean, they're pretty big. A lot of them have some deep pockets behind them, so that's kind of taken the some of these stresses off them, and that's probably an important point as well. Certainly, if you look in the States and you look at someone like ProPublica, or actually quite a few of the nonprofit, Texas Tribune, some of the nonprofit startups in the States, I think are doing these things quite well. But they've got some backing behind them, so it kind of takes them away from, in a way, away from having to directly address some of these questions. And actually, I'm doing a panel at AEJMC, which is the American. We say we're international, but it's a big journalism educators conference. It's in America each year. And we're in Minneapolis next year, and so I'm going to get the editor from MinnPost, which is one of the nonprofits. MinnPost was founded by some journalists who left the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, which is the main newspaper in the state of Minnesota, in the upper Midwest. And they founded something called MinnPost, and it's a nonprofit. They got some financial backing behind them, and they're doing quite well. But they've got an interesting sort of model related to donors. So it's kind of a membership model, but their members are also donors. And one of the things they've done, I think is really interesting, is they've given those people the ability to tell them what kind of beats they want to be covered, which is quite interesting. So I think they just recently, I think it was October, sometime in the autumn, started a mental health beat, a beat about how the state is providing mental health care, what kinds of issues are being raised. So donors, the donors, and you can be a donor for like $1 a month, it can be very cheap, are saying, we really care about this and no one is covering this, so please go and do that. So they've got that sort of relationship. The people aren't saying, do this exact story. They're saying, here's a topic that we think isn't getting a lot of attention. There's here in the UK, in Scotland, do any of you know the ferret? Mm-hmm. The ferret, the ferret is great. I hope they make it. The ferret just started in summer, I think, or maybe last spring, within the past year. It's an investigative journalism site. Again, it's been started by journalists who felt probably quite accurately that the newspapers in Scotland were not really doing their jobs as well as they might. They were not, as you know, yes, because you're not there anymore. They were not. They were not covering the stories that the journalists felt needed to be covered in the way that they should be covered. So they started this site called The Ferret, which I love. Just on its face, I love it, and they have a cute little logo. So it's basically a crowd-funded investigative journalism site, right, in Scotland, and I think for them too, members can, or donors or users can suggest what topics they want to be covered. So I think they've looked at fracking, they've looked at, I think, asylum. So basically, what they're saying is we can't do everything, right? What value do I offer? Well, I don't know how many people they have, a handful, I don't know, 10. It's a fairly small group of people, I think.
I love them too. The huge doubt I have about ferrets and MinnPost is just as they will always look at what their members want them to look at, they will also not to look at what their members don't want them to look at.
Yeah, good point.
That's a huge problem, because the issues with which they are interested are all consensus issues. Agree.
Exactly.
They don't do the hard stuff.
But yeah, and a really important point. So really being guided by their members in what to do and what not to do as well, equally important, so that they can kind of constitute that value. Interesting. Crowdfunding in itself is quite an interesting model. So there's, of course, the correspondent in the Netherlands is going after this. I just was writing about this. There's quite a few. There was one here called Contributoria, which was backed by some Guardian people, which is now folded again. They lasted for about 21 months. And we're doing a variety of stories, but the same kind of idea. So, that one was a little bit different. Contributoria, the idea was kind of like freelancers or different writers would pitch an idea essentially to audiences and set a funding target. So for me to go do this story will take £2,000, and people would contribute, and either they made it or they didn't. And if they made their nut, right, then they went out and did the story. The ferret is different. My understanding of it is different in that it's what topics do you want to see us cover. So a different, but crowdfunding is quite interesting. Not something that legacy organizations have really gotten into. I don't know if they will. It's kind of an interesting model. It's another one where you have to think about how to make those relationships work. So, I mean, I could envision a situation, I don't think any of those organizations I named are doing this, but I can envision a situation where someone with a vested interest, or a group of people with a vested interest, can drive you either to or away from a story. So I think, you would have to think about that. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting models being tried out. Most of them are being tried out by innovators. I think the legacy organizations are doing some interesting things. They tend to be doing innovative products within their existing structures. So the New York Times just is doing a huge push into virtual reality. They're doing some really interesting things. The New York Times, I'm also a member of the New York Times. The New York Times, well, mostly so I can keep getting them here. Anyway, you don't care. The New York Times just recently sent all of its members, or subscribers, whatever they're calling them, they're the people who sign up for the regular access to the New York Times, free Google Cardboard. I didn't get it because I'm not in the US. But in the US, if you were a New York Times member, you got a little Google Cardboard in the mail, and now they're doing virtual reality stuff. So the big organizations are doing innovative things, but they're doing it primarily around their existing models and existing structures. So I don't know if that answered your question. I think the nonprofits are quite interesting, and I think the ones that are looking at donor models are interesting. Still working out the kinks. And you have to have people who know about the ferret, or know enough. I mean, you have to have a kind of an engaged group that will come to you in the first place and find you, or you have to market yourself somehow. Sorry, yeah, that's a really good question.
I have one question. So you said that the media have to be something more than a source of information. And I just wanted to know, just out of interest, in your opinion, what you would consider that something, the most important of those somethings, to be?
In addition to it, well, I think being a source of information is probably still the core. That's also a really good question. I think they have to figure out how to remain an important part of people's lives somehow, because strictly as an information source, there are lots and lots of information sources, and there are sources I can tailor, I can personalize, I can do different things with, I can shape, I can have input into in a variety of ways that might be. So I think inherently it's still about a source of information, and I guess I would add to that, and I've thought this for a long time, and other people have said it as well, that you have to be a sense maker. I think you have, before there was such a wide range of information available, just providing that information was a huge value, because that really was how most people got it. Other than face-to-face interactions, I got it through the media. Now I think because there's this glut, there's this what's the word I want? There's too much information, superfluous amounts of information. I have the key role of the media, and I actually think the British media are much better at this than the US media, at least the print media. I have to make sense of it. I have to put it in some kind of context. Why am I going to go to I think Telegraph is an excellent newspaper, although I don't read it all that much, because the context for me that they create doesn't resonate with me as much as The Guardian does. But they're both doing the same kinds of things. They're both providing that, help me understand what this means. I think particularly for legacy outlets, because I'm no longer getting my information there first. I don't think I won't say no one, but most people are no longer getting there. Most people, even my age and older, and certainly younger people, are not getting their information there. They're learning it somehow. They're learning it through social media, they're learning it through their devices, they're learning it somehow. So why am I going to still go to whoever it might be, The Guardian or to a lesser extent the BBC? I think the BBC is still, particularly on their website, they do a lot of explainer kinds of things on their website as well. They may still be a place where I go to get the latest information, but I don't go to The Guardian. The Guardian is, I love them. I don't know how they're actually going to survive as a daily print product. I don't see how that works. I don't get my news from them. I go to them to understand what's happening. I'm not sure why I need a print product from them every day to do that. It's vastly expensive. Not just them. You pick your news organization.
It's also the only source of revenue. It's still 70% of the income.
I know, because they're not charging for anything for their digital product. I know that, but boy, But it's got to be 70% of their cost as well. I mean, it's got to be, I don't know what the percent is, it's got to be a large portion of their cost to put that product out. I don't know,
Well,
yeah.
actually, the web is a huge cost.
Not as big a cost. They're making more than they're spending on the print. Yeah, I think it's really tough. But nonetheless, why do I still sometimes, not every day, but I do sometimes buy The Guardian, sometimes buy The Times. I subscribe to The Economist, actually, because they help me understand it, right? I saw that there was, you know, there was another attack in Rakhine, right? I mean, there was something happened. I already know that. But help me understand what that means. So a sense-making role, I think, is really vital. And on top of that, or in addition to that, I would say that some sort of relationship, some sort of sense of how I fit into people's lives.